Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Vosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
This month's guest is Christina Courtenay.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
A fascinating chit chat, and welcome everybody to episode 44 of the Books and Brews podcast. I'm getting good at this. I remember the numbers now almost every time.
Yeah. So how's your month been?
It's been pretty good. A couple of shows here and there. Banjo lessons, banjo, snow.
Snow and more snow. How much?
Got more snow up there, probably. We only got a couple inches, but
I'd say we're heading towards 6 inches here. And considering I now have to shovel my way to the outdoor chicken coop and to the indoor chicken and rabbit coop, and we really like to keep the deck shoveled because if we don't, the dog will use the deck as her toilet all winter.
Oh, that's not good.
No, she'll do it in the snow. But so we try to keep the deck shoveled so she'll go out in the grass so we don't have, yellow snow all over the deck. And it's a really big deck, just like everything around our house is really big.
Uh-huh.
So, the good news is I'm getting a lot of exercise, but I just can't get that light right. Keep trying.
Yeah, you're better without the spotlight.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't get enough exercise, that's for sure.
Well, if you want exercise, come on up here and I will let you do all this shoveling.
No, thanks. I'll pass.
Well, see, don't say I never offered. But, mostly we've just been, we did go to a murder mystery and that was really fun. And It was funny because it's like everybody we meet knows the previous owners of our house.
Wow.
Turned out, this is really weird. Our financial advisor, who I think might live in the cities, he actually was dating the daughter of the previous owner for like 5 or 6 years in high school and early college. And so we sat down and these two other couples joined us because, we just went by ourselves and it was a table of 6. And it turned out 3 of the 4 of them had some personal connection with the previous owners here. And I can't remember 2 of them, but one of them had been best friends with the daughter for like all through elementary school.
Wow.
So it was kind of wild. But other than that, my life kind of fits in well with our upcoming author because all I've been doing is feeding animals and schlepping manure.
All right.
That's most what I do with my life.
Appropriate.
Yeah.
I want to know if Chris has started playing his banjo.
He really hasn't had time. He's in that wonderful position where when you're on salary, they can just keep working you harder and harder.
Yeah.
So he's, I think the last time we talked about it, he had been, and he's just run out of time because he's working on so many projects and they've got him traveling again. So, he'll be out for 3 or 4 days at a stretch and then he gets back here. And he's been trying to set up his 3D printer shop out in the detached garage. And
he's got to start practicing quiet quitting.
I'd like it if he found time. He tends to sit down more at the piano and just improvise and make things up. So I'm kind of encouraging him to go to our upstairs music studio and play it on the keyboard that's connected to the computers. And that way it creates, it records it, but it also creates a printout of the actual sheet music as he's sitting there improvising.
Wow.
Yeah, and my goal is to have enough to put together an album and then put together the book of the music because it's all improv, but it's really beautiful. So,
Well, sounds kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't read anything, so.
Well, I have you covered again, and I'm trying really hard not to use my glasses because that would put me out of character. They had in the 1880s were killing each other, not reading glasses. So let me move this in and out. First of all, I read a book called It's About Time, A Million Books Sold for Dad. I've been reading it because I've been editing it to publish. And so that's kind of a neat story about the author's kind of his memoirs about his dad and in fact, you know him, Mark Connor. He's been on the program. Yeah, so I should have just said that. Yeah, so he's an author and a poet, and he's put together this book that's kind of memoir that includes some of his poetry. So it's kind of a neat book. And then I've also been reading a really fascinating book. You've heard of near-death experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as I unpacked books and, kept looking at what's on my shelves, I came across a book called Journeys to Heaven and Hell. And it's very interesting in that it looks at near-death experiences over hundreds of years.
Wow.
So it's comparing accounts that people told, 300 years ago or 400 years ago to much more modern ones, and kind of showing how they're all very similar, and yet there are certain differences too. So I read 2 books, and I've been working on Lamentations, which is 615 pages or something. So I've got you covered. So which book do you want to claim yours?
I like the near-death one. That sounds exciting.
It's a neat book. It's really fascinating. So speaking of through time,
who is our guest today?
I thought you'd never ask. In episode number 44, we have Christina Courtenay. She writes historical romance, time slip, and time travel stories. She lives in, I think I'm saying this right, Herefordshire?
Herefordshire, yes, that's right.
Oh, you actually pronounced the H. Herefordshire.
We do, yeah. Herefordshire, yes, yeah.
Herefordshire. That one. I can say this, though, and pronounce it correctly. It's near the Welsh border in the UK. Christina has won multiple awards for her books. Hidden in the Mist, which we will be hearing 3 excerpts from today, is her latest novel, but you have quite a few more books than that out, don't you?
Yeah, that's my 15th, I think.
50th? Oh my God, making me look like a slacker.
I wouldn't say that. I looked at your website.
Yeah, I keep myself busy, but man, I wish I were at least on my 20th book, because they're all in there and I'm working on a bunch of them all at the same time. So all of a sudden, overnight, I'll have 30. Christina is a keen amateur genealogist and loves history and archaeology, the armchair variety. So welcome, Christina. It is a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
How many guests have we had from the UK? I know we had Philip Watling from, I believe he's in
3 or 4, maybe?
I think, and I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. And I believe next month's guest is also from the UK. So it's fun that, we used to do this around Michael's kitchen table, and we could only have guests who either lived in the Twin Cities or were willing to drive to the Twin Cities.
What?
So it's neat to be able to have guests from around the world now.
Yeah. Thank you, COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a silver lining in every deadly pandemic.
Who knew Zoom existed?
What?
Who knew Zoom existed before that?
Right.
Well, I had to teach lessons by Zoom, and it really did a job on my throat because we had so many connection problems. And I did read one story where this little girl was overheard saying, and it might have even been a teacher where I taught, where this little girl was caught admitting that she deliberately pretended to play the piano but didn't. And her poor old teacher would be going, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Oh my gosh.
Because this little girl didn't want lessons. And I got to admit, that's my organ teacher when I was 7. I would have been like, this is the greatest thing ever. But
I know how it feels.
Yeah. So
that used to be me.
Yeah. Oh, I hated organ lessons, and I hated my teacher too. We are ready for beer number 1.
All right. Before I do beer number 1, I think this is appropriate given that our guest you're in London right now?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, in London, and genealogy and time travel and all of these things. So I've been doing some family research on ancestry.com and tracing all of my various family lines back. In every instance, in every family line, there reaches a point where things start to get wonky and questionable.
Okay.
So that's the point where I stop in each line and then move to another one so that I can go back later and dig in a little deeper. But with the Perry line, which is my mom's side of the family, the Perry line traced it back, and at the point that it gets wonky, so this may or may not be true, but my 11th great aunt could be Catherine Parr, who was the final wife of Henry VIII.
And interestingly, that is exactly what the book Lamentations that I'm trying to get through is about. It's about a book she wrote called Lamentations of a Sinner, which historically is correct. She did write that book. But what's fictionalized is that in the book was stolen. In the book, comma. The English language is fun. And so it's like 620 pages of trying to figure out who did it before Prince or King Henry finds out that she's a heretic and beheads her and all that fun stuff.
So like I said, that's at the point where everything starts to get really wonky. So it may or may not be true, but
that's kind of neat all the same, though.
Yeah. So beer number one is not a beer at all. Being as this reading is all about Vikings and warfare and grabbing weapons from what I imagined to be a table full of turkey wings and such, or turkey legs and such, in a great mead hall. We have mead, Camelot mead to be exact,
In a very
honey wine, because, you think, what did Vikings drink? Well, they drank mead and beer. And I thought, well, let's branch out from beer, because the kinds of beer they would have been drinking just aren't available here in the Twin Cities. Because it would have been probably smoky and seasoned with juniper and all kinds of things. And there used to be things like that available here, but no longer. So I went with mead, because that you can find here.
Good.
So this is, I've tasted it. I'm not a huge fan of mead, so this is not going to be my favorite. Cheers.
Skull.
Skull, that's it. Skull, yes.
Tend to be a little sweet. This one's a lot sweet for me.
It's a bit
made me very
like
happy.
sherry, isn't it?
A little bit.
I can see that. Yeah.
It's like sweet wine. It's like a sweet
dessert wine.
white wine.
Mm-hmm. For those who can see, I am in character tonight. I have my medieval chalices. I have mead. I have my medieval weapons, and I have my Highland crew.
And I have mine. Where is it? There it is.
So poor Michael is probably feeling very left out without a Highland.
Oh yeah, I feel very left out.
So just before you do your first reading, Christina, were you aware that there is such a thing as a miniature Highland cow?
No. I mean, I've met real ones, and I've met the baby ones, calves, but I didn't know they were miniature ones.
I didn't either until one of my sons is very, very into us homesteading here, and so he keeps sending us all kinds of things. And goats is on our list, but he sent me a link to miniature Highland cows, and they only get to be like, I don't know, 3.5 feet at the shoulder, maybe. And that might be a really good solution for someone like me who really doesn't want to be around big animals. I know cows, especially the Highland cow. They're also really stupid.
They're really nice, actually. I mean, my friend has some. Yeah. You can even brush them, and pet them and everything.
I think I would be the least worried around a Highland cow. I know they're about the most mild-tempered animal that God ever made. So, speaking of that, did you hear my dog? Hear that? No. It sounded like, it was funny. It sounded like a moo. She did this. as you said that. So, chatted enough. It is time. I've lost my pen. That's what I'm looking for. It is time for reading number 1. Go ahead, Christina.
Okay, so this is the beginning of Hidden in the Mists, which is a dual time story set in Scotland, partly during Viking times and partly in the present. And it features Vikings, ghosts, and hidden treasure. And as I said, this is the beginning in Viking times. Vestnes Rousai Orkneyjar, AD 883. The double doors to the hall slammed open so hard they bounced against the wall. A rush of cold air and the tang of the sea blew in as someone came running inside, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Grab your weapons, we're under attack." It took a moment for the words to penetrate, the babble of voices, and sink in, but when they did, Olafur, Ottar's father, stood up so quickly he overturned the table, sending food and crockery flying. He dived for his weapons, which were always kept next to his chair, and then ran to grab a shield off the wall, where they hung in neat rows. The other men did the same, and some of the women, including Ottar's mother, armed themselves as well. Ottarr froze to the spot for an instant, then sprinted towards his sleeping bench. His weapons were stashed underneath, and he kneeled to retrieve them, a sword and a battle axe, honed to lethal sharpness. By the time these were in his hands, the attackers were already swarming in through the doors, and the clash of steel on steel and metal on wood rang out. Ottarr threw himself into the fray. It was his first real battle, but he wasn't afraid. He'd been taught well and knew that the outcome didn't matter, only that he fought as bravely as he could, so that he'd gain entry to Valhalla if it was his fate to die this day. Through the haze of anger and bloodlust that flooded his veins, he heard the shouts of the enemy. The words were in his own language, which surprised him. He'd always thought that any threat would come from the peoples across the sea, whose lands men like Olafur had appropriated, or the ones who had occupied the islands before them. It hadn't occurred to him that their fellow Norsemen would attack them, but this seemed to be the case. "Die, Nidhinger," he bellowed, as he succeeded in running his sword through a youth who couldn't be more than a few years older than himself. The stunned look on his face as he crumpled was a crude reminder of the reality of bloodshed, and all around him, Olafur's men were falling too. The high-pitched screams from the women and children of the settlement, at once heart-rending and chilling, made Ottar's blood run cold. He battled his way towards one particular woman who was about to be molested, despite fighting her attacker tooth and nail. Her desperate cries spurred him on, but he kept being intercepted, and in the end he failed to reach her in time. Next to her, crumpled on the floor like broken driftwood, lay a toddler who would never play again in this realm. A red mist of fury washed over Ottarr as he gripped his sword with clammy hands, and the need for revenge rose within him. He concentrated fiercely on what he was doing, but the men of the settlement were vastly outnumbered, and the outcome was never in doubt. The tang of blood hung heavy in the air now. He heard his mother yelling something, and Olafur's reply, "I'm coming, Astmin." But when he dared a quick glance over his shoulder, he was met by the sight of his mother sitting in a pool of blood, her eyes staring sightlessly towards the roof. One of the attackers began to tear her jewelry off with greedy fingers, stowing it in a sack. Olafur was still trying to fight his way through to her, but it was too late. An enemy warrior set upon him from behind. Even with an axe buried in his shoulder, he fought on, roaring like an enraged bull, but Ottarr could only watch helplessly as his father was surrounded and attacked from all sides. No man, however strong, could have survived such an onslaught. As something connected with his skull, the last thing Ottarr saw was his father's body lying on the floor, surrounded by utter devastation. "I'll see you in Valhalla," he whispered. Then he blacked out.
That's a hard scene to write, I bet. In some ways, a hard scene to hear. And I have some questions about that later. But I wanted to touch on the fact that you have won, I'm assuming it's pronounced RoNAs, for Best Historical Romantic Novel. And
Yeah.
Fantasy Romantic Novel of the Year. I was kind of curious about the process. Are these awards that you submit your book for? Does someone nominate them? Are they for members of the professional association? How does that work?
It's for the Romantic Novelists Association in the UK, which is our equivalent of the RWA. And the books can be, you don't have to be a member to submit. If you're not, it just costs a tiny bit more.
Okay.
But the books are usually submitted by your publisher, but you can do it yourself as well. So if you just go to the Romantic Novelists Association's website, there is a form to fill in there, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And can anyone anywhere in the world submit, or is it only for English authors or UK authors?
I think anyone can. Yeah, I'm not sure. They've recently revamped all the rules, so you'll have to look on the website. But I used to be the chairman, and when I was, anybody could submit from anywhere in the world, as long as the book was in English and you were prepared to send it. I mean, these days, obviously, you can send electronic copies. When I was running it, it had to be 5 hard copies or 5 paperbacks.
Yeah, years ago when I submitted my book, I had to give them 5 print copies.
That's right. Yeah.
Time travel to me is about, in some ways, largely about the connection we have to the past. And you hit on that with, for instance, the Asta, I believe it is, has to reconcile the father she knows with the father she realizes has done awful things. And that's kind of a timeless story. When I think of a movie like The Scarlet and the Black, where you've got this Nazi officer. Hi, sweetie, my dog's coming to say hello. You've got this Nazi officer who's a loving and kind and wonderful father, and then he goes does these awful things. And it's a great movie. If anybody wants to watch it, at the end, he ends up begging the priest who's been saving the Jews to save his family. So, but it's a timeless story. And what to you is the heart of why we are so drawn to stories of time travel? Why do you think we are?
Well, I don't know. I think if you like history, then you want to be in the thick of it, don't you? And there's no better way of being there than traveling through time. So if you write a time travel story, you really have to put yourself in that person's mind, to see what does it feel like to be there? What does it smell like? What are you eating? What are you wearing? That sort of thing. So
history.
Yeah, and with the dual time stories, the thing I like is that you get a combination of paranormal and the magical, maybe a bit of ghosts and things like that. And also you usually get 2 couples, one in the present and one in the past. So you get 2 love stories for the price of one. And Sorry.
That was a term I had never heard. Dual, what did you call it? Dual romance or dual time romance?
Dual time, yeah. So it's partly set now and partly in the past. And the people in the dual time story don't actually travel physically through time. They just kind of experience it through dreams or visions or something, or even just reading someone's diary or letters. Mm-hmm. But you get this sense that they're kind of twin souls with the people from the past. So, and I like the idea of twin souls, or 2 people who are destined to love each other through time, no matter when they end up.
So do you see the couple in the present as being sort of reincarnations of the couple in the past, or more, as you say, twin souls?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, they're not exact copies or exact replicas, but they do have some things in common. And the people in the present will perhaps get dreams or visions of what happened to the people in the past, and that could be echoed in their own lives.
So you don't see it as reincarnation?
Not straight reincarnation. Maybe it could be, in some books it is, not in mine.
Okay.
But they do.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about that as I read through the whole book. I'm about 3/4 of the way through right now, I think, so I don't know how it ends. What drew you to the Vikings in particular?
Well, my mother is Swedish, so that's my heritage. I grew up in Sweden until the age of 16, and my family and my mother still live there, so I go back there a lot. And,
fantastic. So you speak Swedish?
Oh, yes, I do, yeah.
You kind of lost there otherwise, huh? That's great.
Swedes, a lot of Swedes speak English nowadays, and they mix a lot of English words in as well.
You know, that actually brings me to the question. There's a language that you use repeatedly in the book. Is it an ancient Norse language, ancient Swedish?
Yeah, that's it's Old Norse. Yeah, proper
Okay.
Old Norse, and all the Scandinavian languages come from that originally.
Okay.
So I can sort of understand some of it, but not all of it. But I was very lucky. I found a PhD student who speaks Old Norse, and she helps me with the phrases, so I get it right.
That's great. We need to move on to beer number 2.
Okay, then. Beer number 2 is from Modist Brewing here in Minneapolis. It is called First Call. I chose this beer because this next reading takes place really early in the morning. And I found myself wanting a cup of coffee to wake myself up that early in the morning. But there's also this element of things are not what they seem in this next reading. So I chose this beer because it is a coffee beer, but it is a blonde coffee lager. So it looks like a pale lager, but it has a pretty intense coffee flavor to it. So it has the wake me up early in the morning coffee, plus the things are not quite what they seem. Because I think, Laura, you said you were told at the store that all coffee beers are by definition black.
Yeah, or darker. So what
that's not true.
Right, I see that now. Now, I did pick this one up. It happened to be in the variety pack I got from Lake Monster. And I thought it was just kind of funny since I couldn't find the actual beer. I can drink both my coffee pale ale, and you have First Call. I've got Last Fathom. So let me not mix up my Mead. And
although yours is it's a coffee pale ale, I've not had that beer from those Earth Rider in Superior, Wisconsin, but their beers are really good. If it's a coffee pale ale, it might also be a paler color than black.
Let's see if you can see the color. I have no idea what
it is. It is a paler color than black, as it should be.
Okay, so you know, I've got so many mugs and cans here. Skull.
Cheers.
Skull.
So it just occurred to me, you're from cider country.
Yuck.
Sorry, me.
You're from cider country in England.
Oh yes, Herefordshire is definitely cider country. Yes.
Yes, I love English cider.
Do you? Oh, you're gonna have to come see us then.
Funky, dry, tannic. It's so good.
We've got at least 3 cider breweries not far from us. So yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
You'd love it. I quite like the mead though.
Yeah, well, cider's better than mead. I love cider. I don't like mead.
I'm pouring more.
Did you like your coffee pale ale?
I did not like that at all. That's probably among my 10 most hated beers you've ever inflicted on me.
All right, then.
So it's a good thing Chris likes beer. He'll enjoy it. So we're ready for reading number 2.
Okay, so this is from the present, not the Viking Age. Skye Logan gripped her mug of tea tightly with both hands, trying to draw the warmth into her very bones, but it wasn't working. She stared out towards the island of Jura, which could be glimpsed in the distance across the sea, a beautiful sight she'd never tire of looking at. The water between there and the mainland was calm today, below a layer of morning mist that also swathed most of the island. It crept up towards the cottage, its soft swirls stirring restlessly on an unseen breeze. Indoors, here in her cozy kitchen, she was safe and warm, but the chill was lodged deep inside her, and not even the wood-burning Rayburn could thaw her out. She was starting to wonder if anything ever would. It was barely light, but she'd been unable to sleep. She had always been an early riser, yet waking up pre-dawn was taking things a step too far. No point tossing and turning, though, not when she had so many chores always waiting for her attention. She was about to turn away from the window when something caught her eye. A shadow came gliding into the little bay that belonged to her property, a rowing boat of some sort, although she couldn't quite make it out. A shiver of unease slithered down her spine, making the hairs at the back of her neck stand on end. Who on earth? Perhaps someone from up or down the coast, out on an early morning fishing trip? But as she watched, the vessel headed straight towards the sliver of beach where she kept her own boat during the summer. There was a hazy figure all alone, and she saw him or her put the oars away and stand up, jumping onto the shore. A her, definitely. It had to be a female, as Skye could see now that she was small, with a long plait falling forward as she pulled the boat onto the sand and tied it to a nearby rock. When she straightened up, a flash of metal glinted off what looked like two large pieces of jewelry, one either side of her chest above her bosom. Her clothing was long and blew slightly in the breeze, some sort of layered maxi dress. She kneeled on the beach for a while, then she picked up a sack and headed for the line of trees, where the forest abutted Skye's garden and fields. Hey! Skye knocked on the window and tried to wave at the intruder to gain her attention, but it had no effect. She ought to go outside and confront her, but instinct made her stay where she was. The woman could be dangerous, deranged even. Why else was she sneaking around on someone else's property? Skye was suddenly glad her front door was still locked. There was something eerie about the individual, the way her shape seemed so insubstantial at times. Skye wasn't entirely convinced she was real. Perhaps I'm dreaming, she murmured. Had she fallen asleep at last, only to imagine herself having breakfast? But when she placed her fingers on the glass of the window, it felt cool to the touch and not in the least dreamlike. I'm going mad, she muttered. She was painfully aware of how isolated she was here, far from any other habitation. Since her soon-to-be ex-husband Craig had left her, she'd been living on her own, with only her two border collies for company. As she turned back to the window, the shadowy figure was disappearing into the forest. Skye waited a few minutes, but the woman didn't come back, and when she glanced towards the beach, the boat was gone too. How is that possible? She whispered, thoroughly spooked now. Who took it? It had been there only moments before. She'd swear to it. There was no reasonable explanation that she could come up with, and the whole episode left her feeling shaken and unsettled. What had just happened? There you go.
One of the things I've really been enjoying about this book is reading about her life on the farm. And of course, as Michael knows, I'm doing some of the same things here. And so I really got the impression that you know how to shear a sheep, you know how to card and dye wool, and all about lanolin and what it feels like in this sheep that leaps off joyfully light after it's sheared. What is your background with all of this?
No, I don't really have a farming background, but I wrote another book which had a sheep farmer as a hero. And my neighbor, who's a farmer he's got about 1,000 sheep, he very kindly let me have a go at trying to shear a sheep. So that was a very interesting experience, I have to say. It was really tricky holding the sheep down and trying to shave it at the same time. Right. But,
and that to me is what makes a great author, somebody who's willing to kind of get in there and get their hands dirty. And this the things I did in my book that, I went to Scotland, I put on medieval leather boots.
Yeah.
Do you know by any chance the connection between lanolin and trombones?
Nope.
Yeah, I'm guessing most people don't. It's actually one of the things that's meant to be especially good for putting on the trombone slide. That makes it really slick. They will use just straight lanolin. So
it was incredibly greasy, I have to say, after touching the fleeces. I mean, they were literally almost dripping. But it wasn't smelly or anything. You'd think they were really stinky, but because they're quite dirty.
Right. And that's the kind of realism that really brings the book alive, going that extra and knowing exactly what you're doing and what you're talking about.
Things like that are really useful. I mean, like I went to, there's a special museum in Denmark for Viking ships, and you get to actually take a little trip around the harbor on a Viking ship and you have to help row it and things like that. It's invaluable, when you're writing about it.
Right, which,
So-
it jumped out at me that you mentioned midges in your book. And I thought
Oh God, yeah.
that I got right only because I actually went to Scotland, but nobody talks about midges.
No, they should do.
Uh,
God,
They should.
pesky.
So one of the things that's kind of jumped out to me, as I hear some of the time slip stories, because I'm sure you're aware there are people who tell some very compelling stories about this actually happening to them.
Mhm.
And of course, there are lots and lots of novels written about it. What jumps out at me is that it seems to go one way. The people in the present see back to the people in the past, but the people in the past never seem to be aware of or see the people in the present. Do you have any guesses as to why that is?
No, not really. I suppose because the people in the present are the ones who are having the dreams or the visions, not the ones in the past.
Yeah, I take this back. I have heard one story. I don't know if it was meant to be a true story though, so it doesn't count, but it was a story about a modern semi driver and an Indian on his horse riding across the Western Plains. And they do see each other, and of course, this young man from the 1800s or whatever on his horse is quite shocked and doesn't know what to make of this semi. But that's the I've ever heard. And somehow or other, I came across that when I was researching I think they're called the Praying Hands of Mary, and I think it's Fingal, Scotland. And it seemed to be associated with that. So I think you did a really good job of pacing and letting out just bits and pieces of Rafe's story. I was kind of curious,
Thank you.
do you study your craft at all? What have you done to learn the skill of writing, and what would you recommend to other people?
Just practice and going to workshops and talks and things like that, listening to what other people have to say, and basically just trying. I mean, it took me a really long time to get published, so I guess you learn along the way. I think what I would recommend is going to associations like the RWA or the Romantic Novelists. They usually run workshops and talks and conferences. You can learn an awful lot just by listening to other people. And also there are how-to books, but I find it more useful when somebody perhaps gives you a critique. I don't know about the RWA, but here in the UK, you can be a probationary member and send in one manuscript a year and get a critique on it, and they tell you what you're doing wrong. And that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, some of my other books are like proper time travel, where the people do physically travel through time. And I played around a little bit with that and had some of the people from the Viking Age actually come to the present as well, just to get their reactions. So you do get, the other side as well.
Right. Yeah, in time travel, I find that more. And that's kind of what happens in my book, is that they actually trade places in the first book. And
it's kind of fun to play with, isn't it?
It's, one of the challenges with that is how not to let it get cliche, scared of the TV and the guy who's flicking the lights on and off and jumping out of when things happen. Which actually brings me to one of the other questions I had, that you kind of touch on the fact that Skye was in a somewhat abusive marriage. And yet I thought I just like a month or two ago, I happened to mention a book I read, and I'm not going to repeat the name because I'm about to say something negative about it, but it was about a woman coming out of an abusive marriage. And I spent half the book just rolling my eyes, like every single thing in here is so cliche. She doesn't come across as real. And I was curious, to me, your book did way better. It came across as very real. She came across as a very real person, not as a character to talk about a social issue. So
thank you.
What you did differently that made that happen?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, I didn't want her to be too damaged by this. Obviously, she has got out of the marriage, and she's trying to stand on her own 2 feet. Because living green, as it were, the way you're doing, homesteading, it was their dream to begin with, but he found it to be too much hard work, whereas for her, it's paradise. It's what she wants to do. So she's had to become strong. And I think he didn't like that, because he wanted her to lean on him, I guess, or be dependent on him.
So that
she has grown in strength, both mentally and physically, I guess.
Yeah, to me, I was really thinking about this question, and like I said, this book I read a month or two ago, I really ended up disliking it. Chris and I actually made this little song from some of the phrases that were just so over the top. And so, it's one of these where the pieces all overlap with all these phrases out of the book. So we were having fun with the book, but not in the way the author intended, because it was so cliche. But I thought it worked, because it's not, this is a book about an abused woman and how she's going to be strong and overcome. It's a story about Skye, who is trying to make ends meet on the farm and having this odd experience and meeting this man. Oh, and this happens to be part of her past. It was, I didn't feel like you were trying to tell a story about, how all women are abused or whatever, but that you were telling a story and that happened to be part of it. So I know, but I thought it was something really interesting to think about for writers. How do you tell a very common story without it becoming cliche? And at this point, I think we need to move on.
Difficult. I'm sorry?
We need to move on to beer number 3.
Oh, okay. Beer number 3.
Neither one of you heard me.
My turn. So let me just say first that I was feeling so jealous of your Highland cows that I went and got my Minnesota State Fair frog.
I love frogs.
Is that like a Highland frog?
It's a Minnesota State Fair frog.
Close enough. I think we'll let him in the club.
So the last beer is from Lake Monster Brewing in St. Paul. I always say it's in Minneapolis, because it's right there on the border between the two cities. It's called Empty Rowboat. It's an IPA. You're going to hate it, Laura. This is a name pairing. This reading and the last reading, the rowboats just stood out to me. Rowboats feature prominently. And rowboats that have been rown ashore and pulled ashore and then left. Disappearing rowboats, rowboats that carry ghostly figures, rowboats. So I went with rowboats. Empty Rowboat.
Very fitting.
All right, here we go. Try not to spill on my laptop. You see, we have a plethora of chalices, goblets from the Ren.
Indeed.
So
Those are beautiful. Did you make them?
No, Minnesota. Oh yeah, this is really, I barely got a drop and I don't like it. No, we have the big Renaissance Festival, and it's like half an hour south of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so Chris and his wife, the wife who's now deceased, they used to go, and then he and I went a few years in a row. So in the case behind us, we've got 15 of these. So
wow.
Choose from. So.
I should have broken out my giant Renaissance Festival mugs that I won in the Renfest homebrewing competition years and years ago.
Oh, really? You never mentioned that. That's very cool. So what did you brew for that particular?
I won Best of Show. It was the top honor award for the entire competition with a Belgian style saison. It was a really good beer, I have to admit.
Very impressive. Yeah, one of the best times Chris and I ever had was when we went to the Mead tasting at Renfest. We left really, really, really happy.
Yeah. I will say judging the Renfest homebrew competition was always fun. It was It was a very casual competition because you're outdoors at the Ren Fair, and the joke was, oh, this beer has a distinct smell of turkey because of the giant turkey legs that are all over the place.
That's funny. Yeah, I would love a job tasting the mead. I don't know if they have a mead edition, but anyway, I think we need to do reading number 3.
Okay. We're back in the Viking Age here, and it's 7 years after the attack that Ottarr was in the beginning there. He survived, by the way. When Ottarr peered round the corner of the hut that housed the forge, he was surprised to see Thorfinn's daughter, Asta, hurrying off towards the shore, carrying something bulky. She was glancing around nervously, as if fearful of being spotted, which piqued his interest. Ordinarily, there was nothing particularly remarkable about her. She was of average build, with even features and a dark brown plait hanging over one shoulder. He'd seen her going about her duties around the settlement and in the hall, but hadn't paid her any more attention than the other inhabitants of the place, whom he mostly ignored. Now he looked at her properly for the first time, and noticed the natural grace with which she moved, the subtle sway of her hips, and the soft swish of that long silky plait. He blinked and shook himself mentally. What was the matter with him? She was just another woman, and the daughter of his sworn enemy to boot. Nothing about her should interest him, except her current activities, which were intriguing. What are you up to? He whispered to himself. She wasn't normally about at this time of day. No one was, except him. There was something so furtive about her movements, he simply had to follow her. He waited a moment so that she wouldn't notice him, then moved silently towards the sea. She was just starting to row a small boat along the shoreline, a bit erratically at first, then settling into a more even rhythm. The waves were against her, which meant that Ottarr could follow her on foot. He dived into the forest and kept an eye on her through the trees as she continued to row for what seemed like ages. With his long legs, he had no problem keeping up with her. Now I'm definitely intrigued, he muttered, as she finally pulled the boat up onto a sliver of beach. She kneeled down to do something, although he couldn't see what. Sound of metal clanking against metal rang out, and he could only assume she had brought some precious items in the sack he'd glimpsed. The forest was dark, and there was a low mist hanging about the place, which was to his advantage. He found a particularly thick tree trunk to hide behind. From this vantage point, he watched while she dug a big hole and buried a whole lot of shining objects, the spoils of war, or more likely, raiding. He clenched his fists because he knew exactly where some of that treasure had come from, his father's locked chests and his mother's body. What he didn't understand was why Asta was burying it here. He'd heard that Thorfinn was poorly, but surely she wouldn't steal from her own father while he was unwell. Actually, nothing about these people would surprise him. They were scum. She appeared agitated, and after she'd finished her task, he heard her shout out her frustration while hurling something into the undergrowth. It seemed most unlike her, as she was normally even-tempered and calm, as far as he'd been able to tell. In fact, he'd never heard her so much as raise her voice before. Curious, he murmured, holding his breath as he turned to survey her surroundings one last time. Would she notice him? But she remained oblivious to his presence. As soon as she'd left, he walked over to where she had buried everything and memorized the spot. If the object lying here were what he suspected, she had no more right to them than Thorfinn had had. He dug around in the soil with his hands and came up with a silver gilt cup. Yes, these were definitely stolen items. The cup looked like something made by the Engelskir, the followers of the White Christ. He put it back and covered it over, stomping on the ground to flatten the earth. Tomorrow night I'll come back and move them somewhere else, he muttered. But he'd need a proper spade to make the work easier. At least that way Asta could never find them again. She didn't deserve to.
One thing I really like about this scene is how it plays into everything that happens afterward. And I think this is a very typical human experience where we judge someone. And he's judging Asta by the entire group she's associated with, and he just makes a statement, they're all scum. You know, they all agreed with what happened to his family. they're all evil. And yeah, that's a very common human experience. We're seeing a lot of it today, where everybody's busy hating anybody who's not in their group. But there are also things about each era that make us different. For instance, in this Viking world of 880 that Ottarr and Asta live in, they just take it for granted that these people are what is called thralls. Essentially, would that be more of a serf, more of a slave?
They're slaves, yeah, they're absolutely slaves.
So
have
they
no
don't even
say
rise
whatsoever.
Okay. Which I suppose serfs really didn't either, but in theory, they weren't slaves. They were free. They were free, they were told, or die. That's a lot of freedom there. Where do you find the balance is in, showing both of these aspects? Do you lean more toward one, more toward the other? Do you think, how do you find that balance personally?
Well, it's really hard to write about people being thralls or slaves because it's so abhorrent to us. We hate the whole concept. We can't even imagine people being slaves anymore. But to them,
even though
it was
throughout history,
it was absolutely normal. I mean, from even Romans, Vikings, Saxons, they all had slaves, and it was an accepted practice. If you lost in a battle and you were captured, you became a slave, and it was just something they accepted. And I don't know, some of them could be freed, and they weren't not all mistreated by any means, but it was just an accepted part of society.
Right. And you also touch on another subject with Asta that's, again, common to the human experience, where she is with this group of people that she begins to realize this father who doted on her did some really horrible things, and she begins to understand that people, as one of the taglines for my books, nobody is all good and nobody is all bad. So how do you kind of work that into your characters, this idea that everybody has their strong points and their good points and their bad points? Thing for you?
Well, I mean, it was like you said, he is her father and he's always treated her well. And she never went on any of his raiding expeditions, so she didn't see the horrible acts that he committed. And I suppose it's really hard for us to see it. I'm guessing that from her point of view, as a real Viking woman, she probably wouldn't have thought about it very much. It's really our modern sensibilities that I have slightly superimposed on her. But, I had her being a empathetic, sympathetic person who was horrified by what he'd done because she never realized.
I think that's normal, though. They didn't have TV. They didn't have books to tell them what the Vikings were doing. I can see where somebody just would not think about it. It's right.
Yeah. And what she tells her father is she thought that when he went on raids, he, fought against the males in whatever settlement he was attacking. And yes, there was bloodshed, but usually women and children and perhaps younger men would have been taken as thralls instead of killed, whereas her father, actually, fact, was evil and killed everybody, even little children.
Right,
and that is what horrifies her because that she'd never imagined he would do something like that.
Right, because she loves kids, and I mean, in theory, who doesn't? But I thought it was very realistic, though, that she doesn't think about it, and then bit by bit, as she gets older and is faced with certain things, she does start to realize. And that's one of the things I really liked about this book, and what I think made it very realistic is that you see the character growth throughout.
Thank you. I'm glad that came through.
Yeah, clearly, these are a lot of novels, and some novels are written just to be light fluff reading for fun. You don't expect character growth. But I think this is one of the things that really makes a good novel is when you see the very realistic situation of people learning and growing and opening their eyes to other people in the world and how the world really is. So just for fun, what are some of your favorite time travel novels?
Oh my goodness. Well, well, I suppose I'll have to start with Outlander. I mean, that's yeah, who doesn't love Jamie Fraser? Honestly.
Right.
But I love the novels of Susanna Kearsley. I don't know if you read those.
Mm-mm.
And Nicola Cornick, who's a friend of mine here in the UK. She writes about Tudor times, and she does some fantastic stories as well. And there's just so many. I'll read any of them, basically.
Yeah, I think one of my favorites, well, in fact, I know my favorite is In the Keep of Time, and that was written in the 70s, and the author is amazingly alive and well today. She's 90 years old. She's in great health, and I got to get her a couple of years ago, I guess in 2019.
Yeah, I forgot Barbara Erskine. Have you read Lady of Hay? My goodness, that was really one of the first that I read.
Yeah, I know her name. I don't know if I've read any of her books. So we are at that time of the evening where we get to give our links. So Christina, right? Where can we find you? Where can readers find you?
I have a website, christinacourtenay.co.uk or .com. Either of them should work. I'm on Facebook as Christina Courtenay. I'm on Twitter as Pia C. Courtenay, because my real first name is Pia, or Pia Christina rather. And I'm on Instagram as well as Christina Courtenay. So yeah.
And we should specify Courtenay. I'm kind of exaggerating the pronunciation.
Courtenay, yes.
It's Courtenay. So make sure you spell it correctly.
Thank you.
What Hidden in the Mists is the name of the book we talked about tonight, right?
Yeah, I have a copy here. I don't know for those of you who can see. Yeah, there we go.
We'll put that in the outtakes. And Michael, where can people find you? Where can people find us?
I am at aperfectpint.net, and we are at booksandbrews.net and Book and Brews on Instagram, and Books and Brews with Laura Vosica and Michael Agnew on Facebook.
I love the way you always
There's a Facebook page that I don't know, or there's a YouTube channel that I don't know what it is.
Well, I think for a while YouTube let you give a custom name, and then for a long time they haven't. So it's youtube.com/a string of random numbers and letters. Do we have a link to our YouTube channel on our webpage?
I don't know. I'll check that out.
We should do that. But if you look up Books and
you
Brews,
do, because I found it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's if you look up Books and Brews on YouTube, it'll bring up a few channels. Ours is the one with the two of us standing by a sign with a picture of the two of us. So it's the one with, us on video. So it should be easy to find. I am at lauravosica.com, and I also have my books are at GabrielSwornPress.com. My only upcoming events are that we are accepting for about another 2 days. Oops, this will air in December. Never mind.
Yeah, missed
it. By then, we'll be accepting submissions for the 2023 Poetry Anthology. Yeah.
I have no events.
And
who is our guest next week?
Oh. Ooh, also from the UK, I believe.
Next month, next time, whenever it is.
Next week, tomorrow, next year. Jen Gilroy, also from the UK. She is the author of The Sweetheart Locket, and I think she has more books than that, too. She has been writing poems and stories since elementary school. She went to work in marketing communications, business development, and academic editing before coming back to writing. She now writes heartwarming romance. You hear the clocks? Can you hear them?
No.
Oh, okay. It's kind of.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I've got the musical one, and then Chris loves clocks, so they all start chiming over the space of about 2 minutes, depending if they're set before or after the hour or right on it. It's kind of funny to hear every hour. Back to Jen. Jen now writes heartwarming romance and uplifting women's fiction about finding home, family, and community, where ordinary women overcome challenges to earn hopeful, happy endings. So that is next month.
Well, that should be fun. Christina, I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your words and your thoughts. This has been episode 44 of the Books and Brews podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Tell your friends, and cheers.